Hello. Hello, everyone. Today we have the pleasure to host Dr. Maryam Golnaraghi, and she's the Global Executive and Advisor at the Geneva Association, and she wears a lot of different hats as you will learn from our conversation. So welcome, Maryam.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So let's start with your educational background, right? So you get a PhD at Harvard, and your major is physical oceanography with a focus on ocean climate modeling. Can you briefly talk about what it is?
Oh, absolutely. But let me step back. I mean, I got into my education as an engineer. So
Oh,
I started with a bachelor's in chemical engineering, a master's in engineering physics. And, what led me to do a PhD in ocean climate modeling was I was very interested in modeling. I love geophysics. I think it's kind of when somebody says, "Oh, I love chemistry or geophysics," people give an eye, but it's a fact. So I wanted to apply those passions to something that was real and we could collect data and we could look into. So that's why, after a lot of discussions with professors across various universities, as I was embarking on a PhD, I decided to actually get into ocean climate modeling. And the timing was right. It was in the 1990s where there had been some critical discoveries about, how ocean, land, atmosphere kind of a ecosystem was starting to seriously impact our life. These were not
mm,
distant areas. We were our technologies were starting to show that there is so much intelligence that could be gained through modeling of what we call the climate system that could
mm.
enhance policy decision making, business decision making. But I tell you, frankly, I got into doing a PhD in this area, not because I wanted to join the industry, because I thought I want to become a professor and teach science. And so I got into this area. I loved the years that I was at Harvard. This was actually a joint program of Harvard, MIT, and Woods Hole. So, I traveled the world's oceans. We did data collections. We ran a lot of different models, and we really extended the modeling technologies. But through that process,
Mhm.
I discovered a lot about myself that, um, advancing science was one thing. But what I was starting to really be curious about is the so what? How is my science, these development in ocean climate modeling, is going to drive better decision making? And that was a juncture from doing a PhD into, embarking on the career that I embarked on.
That's great. And also, we'll circle back to the professorship part of it because you also the adjunct professor here at UBC, right? And I really echo your kind of your whole journey, right? So you start with really a drive, but you probably don't have a very firm like I have to do this. It's like okay, I'm driven, especially at a young age. I'm driven by my interest, and I try, different things. And in the end, I feel like oh, there's a pivot point, right? That's actually very important because nowadays I feel like sometimes students are really kind of anxious about what should I do, right? So it's like, okay,
Do
there's
yeah.
one decision I have to make, but you
Isn't
know,
that the case? So I don't know if my example is a good one because I had a very strong conviction. I tell people, when I was doing my PhD and finished it, I got an offer from MIT to join Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences on a tenure-track position. I rejected it in 3 hours.
wow.
It was very, very clear to me that after having done everything that I had done in science and technology, at that point in my life, joining even one of the best
Yeah.
universities in the world and teaching science was what was my calling. It was very clear that it's not my calling. And obviously, everybody in my family, was on my case, including my brother, who is actually a professor. And he keeps telling me, I wonder if that was a good decision. And it was probably the best decision I ever made. And Because even at that stage, I was convinced that science and technology that was emerging out of the field of ocean climate modeling would have significant impact in the way that we make decisions in the business and public sectors. This was clear to me because as a graduate student, I wasn't just taking and bear in mind, this was the 90s. First, many people didn't even believe climate change was real. Secondly, we lived in a world where interdisciplinary work wasn't very encouraged. You really needed to dig deep into single disciplines. So I found myself not only doing what was required and plus much more of me as a scientist, but also I found myself sort of like going into business school, Harvard Law School, Kennedy School of Government, and taking courses. And always at the end of this term, my advisor would ask me, why didn't you waste your time in those courses? And, nowadays we don't see it as a waste of time. We believe that, no matter what discipline we undertake, we better have a better understanding of other things that also drive decision making. So that was it. It was just this deeper inner sort of belief that I'm here to apply these technologies for better decision making. Yet there was no precedent in our field at that point. I was kind of a sole rider. And I will tell you very honestly, by rejecting that offer, I almost burned all my bridges with the world of my advisor and people who were going to be my references. So I had to make some bold decisions. And the bold decision was I literally walked across the bridge to other side to Harvard Business School, knocked on the door of the dean, the then dean, Dean Clark, who was very new to Harvard Business School. And his assistant wasn't there, so I could get in. Otherwise, I would have been intercepted. And, he opened the door and I told him, I've just finished my PhD in physics and ocean climate modeling across the bridge. I've just rejected an offer as a tenure-track professor at MIT because I believe my science and technology will have deep application in the world of business and policy decision making. Can I look at some opportunities at business school? And he literally on the spot offered me a 2-year senior research fellow position.
Wow.
At Harvard Business School. And that gave me the opportunity to go in to earn my living by writing Harvard Business School case studies that had nothing to do with my field, but also to get an opportunity to explore where I wanted to go next. And that was really the opening into the journey that I started then.
Well, that's a whole lot of such a story, right? So I think a few key points, right? So you pivot, right? So you start with trying to be a professor, and then you realize that you have a vision that you're probably better off driving the change in the industry, and you actually are bold enough to reject, I guess. I don't know if there's another person who's going to do this, right? So reject tenure track.
I don't think so. I don't think anybody, but the point is, I say to all my students and interns that I hire is trust your guts. Yeah. I see that students today are too much into, trying to, get all the certifications, to make, but at the most important thing is to listen to yourself and to reflect on things that you love, things that you don't like, and trust your gut. Get to know yourself. Be critical in a very positive way about what I'm here to do. Yes. And reflect on that. And that gives you, frankly, the boldness to say no to some things. Even at that stage where I was very inexperienced, right? So that's how it started.
Yeah, and also you also take actions, across the bridge and asking for if there's because there I guess nobody knows if there's a position, right? So but you think there should be a position because that's the important direction. You go directly talk to the dean. This is also quite a bold move, and I think for the students, yeah, sometimes you just need to ask, right? So if you don't ask, nobody, nothing's gonna happen.
I would say dream
Yeah.
and ask. It's like the time when I started my sort of my career,
Mhm.
there was essentially. So I tell you what happened at Harvard Business School, which is a really great story. Um, I identified names of CEOs. I even went as high as the CEO in 70 companies from energy, finance, agribusiness, insurance. And I would boldly call the office of the CEO. And I would say, I'm Dr. Golnaraghi. I'm calling you from Harvard Business School. I would like to talk to you about emerging technologies that can help you with predicting X, Y, and Z that could really help you with your strategy. This is how naive I was. But then
How did you get their
sometimes,
number?
but so ignorance sometimes is a bliss,
Yeah.
right? So I actually got into, and I would say, once you say I'm this and I'm that and I'm coming from, I got into 70 presentations. I actually delivered. I was invited to big companies to deliver my pitch.
Mm.
And of the 70, everybody except for one company said, no, not in my lifetime. Thank you so much. And I had all the excuse in the world to quit, but I didn't. And this is why. As part of my presentations, mind you, this was 1997,
Yeah.
I had predicted, we as scientific community, we had predicted the 1997, 1998 El Nino. Now, if I told El Nino to the world, then nobody knew what it is. But now you say El Nino, it's like because of media coverage and everything else, everybody knows about it. So one of the technologies that I was introducing to these companies was ability to model and forecast El Nino with 6 to 12 months in advance. So we had forecasted that the 1997, 1998 El Nino will happen. And this will have implications with respect to patterns of extreme events that we observe around the world. At that point, we didn't have all the, nice technologies. So a lot of this information was sketched by hand,
Oh.
Around the world of what type of patterns we would expect around the world. So obviously El Nino happened and I got 15 calls back. What? How did you know? Where did that come from? And
Wow.
that led to I launching Climate Risk Solutions, my first company based in Boston, Massachusetts, first company of its kind, which did analytical work and advisory work for big companies in energy, agribusiness, finance, insurance. And we worked at the forefront of so many new ideas for 8 years. Development of weather derivatives markets. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That led for development of parametric insurance markets. So a lot of innovative solutions. We worked with utilities and big energy companies. We worked with retail companies around management of their inventory, depending on sort of seasonal to interannual forecast of climate. Was quite novel. And one thing led to the other after 8 years. And I can tell you, it was very difficult. It wasn't easy, right? To find every one of those contracts. It wasn't like everybody had thought about it. I had to be part of creation of the idea, as well as, working to implement that idea. But after 8 years, I came to a hard wall. And that hard wall was the world was keeping data very close to its chest, even at that point. And this is now, imagine I'm talking about 2003, 2004. A lot of solutions that we are thinking today could not be possible because we could not get access to data. A lot of the data on the climate side is collected using taxpayer money, right? US can. All that data in certain countries was protected, for example, in Europe. So if we wanted to go to Europe and develop financial solutions to mitigate risk of extreme weather for different industries in Europe, we could not get data about meteorological, hydrological, and climate-related data. Those were sort of locked in the meteorological and hydrological services. So my next journey was with the US government, who had all the data open and available and accessible almost at no cost, together with like Australia and Japan, to go to United Nations, to World Meteorological Organization, in a senior executive position to do a whole range of things. First is to open up data policies. Second was to get the world to think about applications in the way that we had creatively thought about applications to climate risk, right? To managing climate risk in a most creative way as part of core business. This is what we did in the first 8 years of my company. And then thirdly, to develop an international program that allows government to think beyond their status quo and start thinking about, you know, how do I develop strategies to mobilize the country towards adapting and mitigating climate change. So that was sort of one thing led to another. And honestly, none of those jobs existed.
Yeah.
I had to work hard to create them through the work that we did.
Yeah, so I noticed this, right? So you have the vision and you identify what's going to happen in the future and you take action because you don't want to wait for other people to create a position because you know that's critical.
It would not have happened.
Yeah,
it just would not have happened. Yeah,
that's a very important, inspiring idea to the students. Sometimes you don't wait for the job to be created, but you know, you and your group can actually start something, right? They become bigger and bigger.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's great. And that's actually a good segue to your current position, because I know, again, you wear different hats, right? So in your current role, I guess, I guess you work closely with many insurance companies, right? So, and you mentioned there's a climate risk and how that's going to affect, supply chain and all that. So what about insurance industry? What are the challenges they're facing and what are the opportunity that you think it's there?
Sure. Before I jump into that, I want to make a connection. Okay. So, and particularly, this is what I tell to the students.
Yes.
That you end up, the days where we say, oh, I worked in this company for 40 years is over. People keep reinventing themselves. To my disliking, maybe a little bit too often, people are jumping from one job to the other. But, each and every one of us have our own unique story. This is what I tell my daughters, both UBC graduates, one from Sauder, the other one biology and Sauder, that you build your own story. And there is one person like you in the world because of combination of experiences that you've had, places you've lived, things that you've done. So make sure don't lose grab of that. Don't try to compartmentalize yourself with this and that all the time. That would be, because that's going to require you to take a deep look at yourself with what you like, what you don't like, where are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, how are you going to work with your strength to deal with your weaknesses, and ultimately, what is it that you want to leave as your legacy in the world? Okay? So, sometimes this may sound very cheesy, but, I kind of felt like I'm in this world to do something because I lived, certain things changed, okay, for the better, for enhancing quality of life. That was, in my small world, this is what drove me, at least, not to settle and always quest to find what was right for me or created. Now,
That's a very powerful message. I think that we should all...
This is so important that I think now more than ever, I think, the days of, this is what I saw, for example, when I was at Harvard. The pattern was kids graduate from undergrad, they go into McKinsey for 2 years, they get trained, and then they will jump into a business program. Whereas you would see students who actually went into the real workforce and really got their hands dirty, understood the industry, what worked, what didn't work. And then they came back to business school at age of 27, 28. And you would see how they would deal with business school, a professional degree, for example, coming 2 years out of an undergrad versus 6, 7 years of getting their hands dirty. It's like those people were like going through it, trying to absorb everything. You would never hear that they say, oh, this is hard. Whereas, those that were jumping into a professional degree, being law or business right after college and 2 years of McKinsey, they were struggling. Oh my God, this is so hard. They were still treating business school as an academic endeavor.
Yeah, so
right?
there should be a shift in mindset.
Absolutely. That comes with experience.
Right.
With working through difficulties, with working through challenges, with trying to solve those solutions, right? So going back to my journey of going into insurance industry. So for 10 years, I served a very senior position in one of the most strategic yet operational organizations of the UN, which is World Meteorological Organization, the grandfather of climate change research and the grandfather of all the data and analytics that goes with it. And I worked across 40 governments to try to build rigorous programs and build capacities of these governments for building forward towards both mitigation and adaptation. And that would mean looking at challenges that governments faced, the fact that there was a lot of uncertainty with politics and a lot of turnover, to look at technical capacities and try to enhance them. And the way we did it is I built partnerships with other organizations that would complement me. So for example, one of my big partners was the World Bank Group. Another one was some of the technical organizations of the UN that are doing solid work. And we would go in as a team inside these countries. We will create regional cooperation, and we'll try to look at what are some of the common challenges that we could leverage resources to solve together, as opposed to do it in silos and in that. And that's a message to how I have carried forward with my career, right? So after 10 years, my kids wanted to come back to North America. We decided to come back, but instead of going back to Boston, we came back to Vancouver, which is where my family is based. But I came back as a senior advisor to U.S. and Canadian government. I worked on a lot of cross-boundary challenges between the two countries when it comes to early warning systems, various kind of standards, et cetera, et cetera. And this is where the leading international think tank of the insurance industry, which is my current company, my organization, the Geneva Association, reached out to me. And that was, thank God, to LinkedIn. I created a LinkedIn profile. So I do believe in it. We recruit through LinkedIn. I'm recruited through LinkedIn. So it's become one of the main mechanism where you can build your partnerships, you can build your relationships, you can search for jobs, you can find people to join your team, etc. And that's how it happened. I got a call, and the idea was the industry was seeking a global expert with a vision to come and help the CEOs of the industry build a strategy towards the future. Because obviously climate change impacts insurance industry both for better and for worse. And this was an opportunity not to miss. I jumped on it, obviously, because throughout my company, throughout my work in the UN, I heavily engage this industry because they are enablers, they are catalysts, and they could really work with other sectors or government to find solutions. So that is how I embarked on accepting this position. My organization is exciting, this platform, because it's a CEO-driven organization. So this body is 90 CEOs of largest insurance reinsurance companies globally, and these are group CEOs. And by working at that level, we can be very strategic.
Right.
There is a lot of opportunity to educate the company, but also get experts from the company to come in, create industry collaboration to solve issues that no single company can solve. And a lot of the challenges that exist within different sectors, being insurance, oil and gas, cement, steel, aviation, whatever, when it comes to finding solutions to climate change, is no company can solve these issues alone. Industry collaboration is of the essence, right? So I can tell you a little bit now about how insurance industry works, if that's of interest.
Yeah, sure. So I have a very basic understanding. Then I learned the word of reassurance
Yeah,
a few
sure.
months ago. So yeah, so a quick
Of course. So imagine it could be a company, an individual, that wants to insure against certain risk. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're homeowners. Let me give you that example. It's a really great example. So homeowners, we buy insurance so that if something happens inside our home or some external forces destroy our home, we can get financially compensated to build back. So insurance companies come and offer these policies to a whole range across as big of a sort of a portfolio of entities with the same risk, but that some have higher risk, some have lower risk. They collect what we call the premiums. They actually invest it so that they can make more money on it, to be more liquid and also to be profitable. And I will get into that, how important that is. And, should something happen in this portfolio of underwriting, they compensate you for that, right? Now, imagine as everybody's risks go up and you're not able to charge the right premiums, then all of a sudden the industry will find itself compensating a lot, and it could be at the risk of insolvency, not having enough funds. Right. So bottom line is, insurance is a business, and it brings financial stability to the society in case of some kind of an adverse event. It could be an extreme weather. It could be cyber, interruptions from business from cyber. It could be, other type of damages and liabilities and business interruptions and so on. So it's foundational. You have life, insurance companies that underwrite health and life. You have insurance companies that protect our assets. Now, there is a flip side to that underwriting. As companies collect premiums, then the flip side of it is the investment side. Insurers are the second investors after pension funds in the world, okay? Because they collect the premium and they invest it. And the point of that is to build a strong financial resilience. So under worst case scenarios, when they have to pay out, they will not go bankrupt. Yeah. They will not go insolvent. Now, just to give you examples, in late 80s and early 90s, in Europe, following massive, windstorms, and then in United States, following Andrew and a couple of other major hurricanes, many companies went bankrupt. So imagine if a company goes bankrupt and and they're insuring you, what kind of position they put you in. So you do not want your insurance company to go bankrupt. To make sure that happens, this is an industry that's deeply regulated. In other words, insurance companies, are managed by regulators in terms of how much, for example, they can charge for their premiums on one hand, but also what kind of investments they can make. So, for example, typically, insurance companies are very limited in how much they can invest in emerging technologies that haven't been demonstrated because the risks are high. By nature, this industry needs to be very conservative because they're managing premiums that are collecting and they have a liability to pay, right? So insurance companies that are underwrite assets, we call them property and casualty insurance companies, right? They have a very short investment cycle, 3 years, because they have to constantly stay liquid, because they have to pay out these annual, whereas life insurance companies, they sell you 30-year life insurance. They actually invest long term. So you see majority of infrastructure systems around the world are actually invested in by insurers and by pension funds. So this is kind of a insurance 101. Now, when it comes to climate change, then you have to distinguish. Am I a P&C insurance, property casualty? Am I a life insurer? Am I looking at my underwriting side or am I looking at my investment side? So they're different. And obviously, like everybody knows that when you think about climate risk, you can break it up into 3 categories: physical climate risk, risk of extreme weather, and slow changing trends like droughts and those kind of things. Second kind of risk is risk of transition. In other words, we know that our world needs to transition to a decarbonized economy, to a low GHG economy. So what are the risks? Policy or uncertainty associated with policy, technology, uncertainties associated with technological innovation that we need to have to enable this transition, reputational risk. There is a lot of reputation. People are behind companies saying you're not doing this. So those are the kind of risks that we classify as transition risk. And then there's
just interruption a little bit. So this reminds me of what our Prime Minister Mark Carney's book. He mentioned there's three risks related to climate change.
Yeah, the third one is litigation risk. Obviously, Mark Carney was the governor of Bank of England, and he was the sort of the person behind defining of these risks through what he established together with Bloomberg, which was Task Force for Financial Related Climate Risks. That was launched in 2017, and that led to a lot of development in the financial sector, regulatory sectors. There has been a setback because one of the arguments to what Mark and company sort of did, and we were heavily part of it, is that, we cannot expect the financial and insurance sector, who became sort of the targets for that work, to solve problems that sit at the heart of public policy of every country. In other words, you cannot expect financial and insurance sector to exclude oil and gas companies if a country's strategy is to further develop oil and gas, because that is a public policy and a government strategy issue. Financial sector and insurers are enablers. They're catalysts. So don't politicize them, right? So coming back to the risk, the one risk that I think in the world was not well understood is climate litigation risk. And, climate litigation risk traditionally, and this is very relevant to businesses, it was traditionally like, if because of climate change you incurred a liability and somebody has to pay for it, right? Versus what we call strategic litigation, litigating against a corporation or a government to change their action, because their action could lead ultimately to more liability later on. So that was a field, I actually published the very first cohesive report of that in 2020, 2021. This is how early we try to get to these things. But coming back to your ultimate question is, and this is what I actually teach at Sauder, called climate economy. We need to take our fundamental sectors. In Canada, for example, we have mining, forestry, oil and gas, tourism, food and agribusiness, etc. And we need to look at how physical transition and litigation risk could materially impact different aspects of business. This is what I do for a living. I look at core business And we try to work with different sectors, not only in understanding what the risks are, including insurance itself, but also how to develop business models that are more resilient to factors in climate, and they are moving towards decarbonization and lower GHGs. Critical components of that is risk modeling, development of solutions, working with critical actors, and committing to implementation, right? And the way I have tried to bring insurance industry is twofold. One is, as an industry, we need to understand how it impacts us on both sides of the balance sheet, right, and how to become more resilient and decarbonize. But that's only part of the story. The biggest contribution, which I am innovating and I am sort of mobilizing, is how do you use the expertise of this industry in data and analytics, in risk engineering. Insurance industry is one of the biggest employers of engineers. It's one of the biggest employers of mathematicians, physicists, and modelers, okay? And obviously one of the biggest employers of underwriters who are doing actuarial studies, right? So how do we use the expertise in risk modeling and analytics, in risk engineering? I can explain to you what risk engineering is if there is interest, and in underwriting, to enable more resilient business models and help various industries to transition to their decarbonized model faster and better through innovation in risk management, because that's what insurance is all about. Insurance business is about managing risk. Yeah. And for the amount that you can't manage, transfer the risk through reinsurance and through the capital markets, right?
So actually, the next question is really related to any exciting progress. As you mentioned, there's different fields, right? So different lenses. So let's actually pick on the risk engineering you mentioned, because I'm not very familiar with that term. So can you briefly explain what it is and what is the most exciting or advancement in that particular field?
Fantastic. Excellent question. So I would say one of the most exciting developments in the insurance industry is how do we leverage our expertise in risk identification, risk modeling, and risk management to help homeowners, business owners, and governments mitigate risk of extreme weather. And if your students are interested, I can share with you. So essentially, almost like my reports are becoming the blueprint of industry. So if you read this, this is essentially the position, because, they get the stamp of 100 CEOs of largest companies, 24 trillion of asset under management, right? That's what I'm doing. On the other hand, the most exciting work that I think I'm doing, that I'm seeing the impacts on the ground, is mobilizing the engineers in insurance companies to work with technology developers. Those are developing, decarbonization models, people that are behind, industrial geothermals, SMRs, carbon capture storage solutions, green hydrogen solutions. I'm just, the list is, LDES, how you bring these risk engineers together with technology developers, investors, and industrial bodies that are supporting these technologies for ultimately adoptions. How do you bring risk engineers much early on in the process, from first-of-a-kind pilots, to start assessing, modeling, and de-risking these highly risky, very expensive projects, to try to unlock capital faster and more? So already, with some of the work that we've done, we are now partnering up, for example, with largest oil and gas companies who have access to the carbon capture storage projects, They've done it on their own. Now they want to work with governments to scale them. But everybody says and understands no insurance, no finance, no project, no decarbonization. We are now working with them, going through the full value chain of CCUS to see where is it that industry can insure, where is it that industry needs to work with the project developers and governments to find insurance solutions, where is that the government should serve as a backstop. So that is to me the most exciting thing, because there's also a flip side to this, that the world, and I really hope your students take this very seriously, as part of solutions that we are trying to develop, our entire focus is on GHG, greenhouse gas emission reduction, carbon reduction. But a lot of the technologies that we're going to develop, from mining of rare earth, for example, for batteries, to early processing, to advanced manufacturing, to operations, to ultimately decommissioning, is going to have a massive environmental footprint. Nobody's worrying about the footprint of emerging technologies, environmental footprint. So while as an industry, we are working with our risk engineers towards better understanding of those risks, to unlocking finance, to find risk mitigation measures so that you can replicate projects better and better with less risk. On the other hand, we are coming with a big voice, and this is my next project, to the world and saying, hey, yes, we are expediting these technologies, but do we know what is the environmental footprint of mining rare earth and critical materials? This is the quest. This is what every country right now, including Canada, United States, everywhere, wants to have their hands on. Everybody wants access to critical materials and rare earth sources. But we have seen, for example, in southern China, that if these are not done sustainably, it will have massive environmental impacts from, pollution of water, pollution of earth. So we need to start doing these things with sustainable solutions, and that's where the opportunities are.
That's great. That's actually that's when I basically started to teach life cycle assessment, right? So you do need to have assistants thinking, look at the whole life cycle of the project.
100%.
Yeah. So I think this reinforced the message that I kind of
100%. And I love to connect with you separately to talk about that, because that's the area that, we've now figured out ways of bringing insurance industry with industrial sectors, with governments and technologies to enable, deployment of these decarbonization solutions and adoption. But the next sort of big chunk of work that I'm going to do is that life cycle view of environmental impacts of these technologies that we need to anticipate now, to give a very big signal to governments that instead of reducing environmental footprints, you need to create enabling environments, yet you also need to start working towards preventive approaches to environmental risks.
Yeah, and those risks you have to, it's kind of, you also will have the locking effect, right? So if you don't identify them early, so this billions of dollars put in there, so it's like one-way door, basically.
Exactly.
That's great. Let's probably then I think this could segue pivot to your other role, where you're a professor at Sauder, and you mentioned that you teach climate economics, right? So so the students, so I think they're all kind of aware of the need for addressing the climate change. So probably quickly, what kind of students do you have? Are they kind of all kind of MBA kind of oriented students, or do you have some like engineering students also taking course?
Sure, excellent. So first of all, I have just taught one course last year. It was outstanding. When I went to the class, it was my first exposure to UBC and to Sauder. And I was just hoping that, the students would be a bit on the mature side, which is exactly what it was.
Nice.
I'm very happy that Sauder, brings in, there are a range of students, but at least in my class, I found, generally a range of backgrounds from finance to engineering to science and technology to economics. So very diverse range of backgrounds. But I think one common denominator among everybody is they had worked at least 4 to 5 years in a real sector. Okay. And you know, our conversation was pretty intense, was pretty deep already because they could draw on their expertise and what they observed. Now, I also, besides what I do at Sauder, I go around and I lecture. Last year, I did a series of lectures across the Eastern Corridor of United States, from Harvard to Princeton to others. So what I'm sharing with you is across all the universities that I have talked about, not to say that every year I have one internship position at my organization, which I have created. We get many candidates, and I hire one person for, I would say, almost like 24/7 mentoring. It sounds like a nightmare, but it's not. It's really helping students with a lot of promise to find their path into the real world, which I hope our universities do more of, right? So what am I observing? And I really want to emphasize, number one, I'm finding that a lot of students are being enamored by some of the more what I call superficial aspects of climate change development, you know, certifications in sustainability. And, you know, I had one student that just, you know, applied for my program with one page of just certifications. And I asked him, I said, look, you are a hardcore engineer, right? Why did you get all these certifications? It's almost like I'm lost and probably you're lost. What good does it do for you? Right. So my advice is solving climate change issues is as core business of an issue as you can imagine. And is not going to be solved by these, you know, 2-3 months certification here on sustainability, this and that. Okay. The more concrete background you have, and you further supplement it with more concrete background. Okay, so I give you an example of people that are applying to my program. Maybe a bachelor's and master's and a PhD in engineering plus a law degree. I mean, so those days of superficial interdisciplinary research, when we do a little bit of this, a little bit of this, is over. Problems that we are facing requires hardcore science, hardcore engineering, hardcore understanding of, you know, social issues, hardcore understanding of legal frameworks and how they are evolving. So within core businesses, within core disciplines, find your journey. Yeah. Okay, root yourself into, you know, core business. So one of the things we observed is that, for example, over the years, many companies hired chief sustainability officers. Yeah. Those chief sustainability officers whose work was directly linked to core business. In other words, they worked with the chief risk officer, chief investment officer, chief engineer, chief technology officer, that whole executive team, and were able to bring in climate risk into core business, which then reported up to the CEO and the board, succeeded. Those chief sustainability officers that were really there in a marketing capacity, where they worked in parallel looking at what the company can do with respect to their targets, without checking back with the core business. Does core business deliver really? Can I really shift my core business so dramatically to meet these things? They didn't. And those companies became the target of greenwashing cases, right? So as you venture into your careers, there is inevitable that consideration for climate change in terms of risks that I talked about is part of core business. Any company that doesn't assess risk of extreme weather to any new construction, to any new infrastructure they're investing in, they're going to pay at the end because they're not going to build that infrastructure resiliently, right? Or don't consider about actions that could lead to climate litigation will be a target of climate litigation. So understanding and integrating these risks and subsequently opportunities and solutions is core business. So what I hope is as the students venture into exploring job opportunities, talking to the companies, ask those questions. And if they're very keen on going into a company that is at the forefront of this should be part of the discussions. Like any industry, there are leaders and laggards. And, you know, it's really important to understand, am I joining a leader who is at the forefront of modeling and managing these risks and creating opportunities about them? Or is it a company that's going to be a laggard and catch up eventually in time? That's how I would say. But stick to it as a core business, not as, you know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's very, very insightful, I think. Yeah, so especially for this, the students who just kind of graduate from undergrad. So many possibility, but so many directions as well, right? So
absolutely.
What I hear is that
trust
you really,
your gut feel.
And
trust
also kind of
your gut.
find a deep-rooted expertise is very important.
Fundamental.
Yeah. You can get you know, complement skills, but you do need to have that really deep root in the core science, engineering, or like a social
or whichever direction you're coming from. Get deeply rooted in it and then supplement with others, right? So I would say our engineering students need to understand how business runs. And they need to understand, you know, litigation cases. A lot of things from litigation comes from failure of the solution. So not that I'm saying you need to do all of it, but think that your education journey is an ongoing journey, right? And certifications just don't cut it. You know, you need to go into deep core and understand how different fields are responding to these issues.
Yeah. So it's like I always tell my students, you know, before you run modeling, you really need to understand how things work, right? The nature of the problem, first principles.
And what data you're getting in.
Then you can understand the data, right? So like, does that make sense? Right? So is it even possible to make a decision in that case?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Maryam. I think to me, this is so many things to unpack. I would definitely, usually what I do is I would write a quick like digestion of what we did and kind of post it alongside with the link for this. I will probably really need to rewatch the video.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so glad. And let's have a chat about this life cycle view.
That would be great.
It's fundamental. Excellent. Wonderful. Take care of yourself. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye now.